Hi, this is Brian from Open Door Community Church. This is the After Service podcast, and we have a unique one today for you. It's we're not going to be talking about the sermon today. We're going to be actually talking about an event that occurred in Joe's life. And to kind of get it started, I think what I'd like to start with is, so what's happened, Joe? And maybe you can kind of put a little context for our conversation.
Yeah. Well, many of you know that, gosh, I think it's been about 4 years ago, my mom was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, which is usually a virtually, 1 month to 5 months or something, the people don't survive that generally. Well, my mom was unique in that they caught that early. And, as of this summer, she was in remission, which is quite remarkable. Really, and not something that anybody necessarily expected. But then last week on Thursday, I had a phone call with a woman who has taken care of my mom, and said that she was basically catatonic. Not sure what specifically happened, but the gist of it is that the onset of whatever this was very quick. And then on Tuesday morning, yesterday, from this recording, my mom passed on.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, and quite honestly, for just so everybody also knows, is you and I have basically not been able to talk at all up until now about any of this. So this is all pretty fresh, and and so I just, it was an opportunity to be able to let people know, and have an opportunity for people to hear from you about how you're processing it and how they can respond. So tell me a little bit about your mom and how you've been processing this.
Sure. First of all, I want to apologize that you're going to probably hear Sam playing basketball upstairs.
That's a joy. That's
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. Well,
Right.
I told Sam, we'll do whatever, because ultimately, there's life up there.
Just kind of off the topic, but one of the things that people get frustrated with when someone they love dies is that the world doesn't stop.
Yeah.
It continues, like people playing basketball and cars keep going, and so life
Yeah.
continues.
So,
Go.
yeah, I think part of what I wanted to do today is begin a larger conversation about how we as Christians engage with people who are grieving. It's something that we don't always do well, but it's not just Christians. A lot of folks struggle with how to engage with people who've experienced loss, and it's it's worth exploring that a bit. We're not going to try to explore that too much today. We'll reserve that for next week since we don't have a sermon on Sunday. And for those of you who are listening, if you're not aware, there's going to be a wonderful program for Christmas Eve on Sunday. So if you're available, love to see you there. Bring your family and just enjoy a special Christmas presentation with us. But as we're talking today, if there's questions that you have or anything you'd like to share that you'd like us to discuss as part of this topic, go ahead and send them to Brian. I don't want them.
No, send it to me or Jesse.
Yeah. Because, I think a big piece of how we engage with people regarding grief has to do with our own perspective. And my perspective is fairly narrow, right? I mean, I've lost grandparents, and at this point I've lost both parents. But other people have had different kinds of losses, and, they've lost spouses, they've lost children. And even if like you've lost both your parents as well, so we have that in common, the nature of the loss is different. The way that we process that loss because of the relationship we have with those people is different, and the way we've lived our life is different. And so there's so many things that speak into that. So
yeah, that was definitely a point I wanted to say was, as I looked at some of your notes that you had for this, was two kind of underlying issues that I thought was, one is don't make it about you.
yeah,
and the other one is don't assume anything, really. Like, you don't know the nature of the loss of the person that you're talking to. You don't know. I mean, it could be a parent, but the parent was, let's say, abusive to you, and then your grief gets really complicated in that case. But on the other hand, it could be, the best friend of your whole, he was your whole world, and then that's different as well. It's like it could be someone who, a spouse is grieving their spouse who had dementia for 10 years. That's very different than a sudden heart attack.
Yeah.
So don't make it about you, and just, you have to really sense where they're at.
Yeah. I remember, when my dad passed, there were a lot of people. It was kind of a weird time. It was during the summer, just before VBS. So there was a lot going on at church and trying to carry on. And, there were a couple of times when people kind of engaged with me where I knew their intentions were really good, but the way they engaged with me made me uncomfortable, let's just say, or put me off to be a bit stronger, and just trying to remember that folks, their intentions were good. So, well, one thing I guess I want to share is that the way that I process grief, is I feel like it's important for me to control how I engage with people. And as people are offering condolences or wanting to, express, that they care for me and my family, it's, I'm not sure where it comes from, but it's just, I prefer to keep some of that private, and I did share with this on Facebook, but I get to kind of control my engagement in that. And I do understand that people want to engage because they care about me, which is wonderful. So one of the things I just wanted to ask, I wanted to make sure that people know, because I know people care, but also that I need some space. Is kind of processing some of this, and we can talk some more about. You asked about my mom, but I didn't really engage in that question. So if you want to restate it, I can jump back in on it.
I can't. I just wanted to say just a brief comment with that is, like, and we can swing back to it of what to do or to express care and that sort of thing, but just to remember that they may not want to necessarily engage in conversation the person who's grieving with you at this particular time, nor at this time in this circumstance.
Hmm.
Maybe it's a different time or place. That's okay. That's okay. And so you got to let people have that space. So, but your mom. Tell me about your mom.
Sure. Well, what do you want to know?
Saw some pictures.
Yeah.
Yeah. The 70s.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. I was born in 1970. That's when I met my mom. That's a dumb joke, but my mom, I think I've shared this. I know I've shared this at church before. Had a pretty rough childhood. She grew up with an abusive father, and a lot of trauma related to that. And then as a what do you call somebody when they're between like 5 and 10? They're not tweens.
Elementary age.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about the dog. I probably have a package being dropped off.
Oh, I didn't even hear the dogs, so you're fine.
I will ignore them.
Okay.
I don't know. So what would that be? Late adolescence? Yeah.
All right. Well, anyway, she was, elementary school age, and she was sexually abused by a boy down the street. And when she reported that it had occurred, basically she was told to either A, it didn't happen, or B, don't share it. It was just a different time. And that was a trauma that she carried with her and suppressed for a long time. What I had for a mom was what we all kind of hope for, is somebody that is fiercely protective of her children and incredibly loving and nurturing. And I have a lot of fond memories. So I posted some photos on Facebook, and almost all of them were of the mom that I really reflect on the most during that time, up to, when I was a teenager. And part of that is around the time my mom was probably 40, she recalled the trauma that she had been suppressing. And that really, there was a fundamental shift in how, in our relationship, and how she kind of engaged with the world. And what happens for a lot of folks in that situation is they revert back, like emotionally or mentally in some respects, to the time of that trauma. And that's kind of what happened. And so there was just a big shift in who my mom was and what my relationship with her was. So what I was telling you before we started, I've spent decades kind of mourning my mom, the one that I recall from my childhood. And, definitely longing to have that person back. So when my mom passed yesterday, it was definitely sad, but sad in a different way than I think some people would expect. Sad that, the way that she died wasn't probably the way that she wanted to go. Sad that, a person is leaving the world, excited for her to be restored. That's something that I whispered in her ear was, I'm so excited for that little girl who had been hurt so many years ago to be fully restored the way that God intended her to be. So when I think about that, there's a joy, and my mom's name was Joy. There's a joy to that realization, that when you see those photos I put on Facebook and you see this happy little kid, that you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited for her to be reunited with her grandma, my great grandma, who she loved, who was the inspiration for my faith. And so many times as we were waiting for her to go, we were like, that grandma's waiting for you. She's You know, it's going to be amazing. But yeah, there was a relief as much as anything and joy for that child to be restored. Not as much about, it may sound strange, but not as much about the woman who passed, but the woman that I knew. So if that makes sense.
It does, and I think that anyone who's lost someone who had dementia,
Yeah.
it's not, and all grief is different, but there's at least some parallels there. My mom, when she passed, was not the woman I grew up with.
Yeah.
She was very different. Still her, so there is a sense, but it's not the same.
Yeah. And I think that's a great parallel, because it's, I mean, obviously it's not quite the same, because but foundationally, it's that the wiring in their brain has changed. You know, I mean, I think we can all reflect on, as we get older, there's still parts of us that feel like we're 13 years old, or feel like we're in our 20s, right? There's a consistency of that soul that, you know, even though we hopefully get wiser and we learn more, and the way we engage with the world is different, but we're still fundamentally the same soul that we've always been. And it's almost like there's a with dementia, or mental illness, there's like this mask or a filter over the top that changes kind of the way we see or interact with that individual.
Oh, it gets me teary. I think there's people that have passed in my life, and there's people that I know in my life that have been so ravaged by the world. I long to see them restored.
Yeah.
What are they? How amazing is it going to be when they are all that they were created to be? It's like, oh.
Yeah. You know, when you look at years of being ravaged, that you know, like, I didn't think about it as much with my dad. I mean, his body had deteriorated significantly, but the person that he was consistent. So, you know, I wish that he wasn't so frail. And so when I think about him being restored, it's not about who he was. It's about more of his, you know, the tent, as it were. That the tent was broken, but but he gets this beautiful house now. You know, so it was more of that. I know we're kind of talking around some different things, but I think it's kind of important for me to let folks know that anybody losing their mom, it's a major significant life event, and we may have expectations about how people are going to respond based on our own experience, and I wanted people to know a little bit about what mine was, partly selfishly, because then I don't have to explain it a lot more.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I wanted to say, and we can talk a lot more about this next time, is many years ago I had a conversation with someone from Kathy's work, who works at a retirement facility, and for 40 years, her job was to help people grieve. And I mean, they have like 50 people a year die at her work. I mean, so
yeah,
I am not an expert, but this woman, I would call her an expert. And what she talked about was circles. And that, for example, when a spouse dies, the one who's still alive, they're in their own circle.
Yeah.
And then the siblings are right outside of that, and then maybe outside of that would be like the spouses of the siblings. Not quite the same, but it's close.
Yeah.
And then beyond that would be things like friends. And her point is you can't assume what the people in a closer circle are feeling. That's not, you don't get to lay your burdens on, like a friend can't go to a sibling and share how sad they are. Like, you don't get to do that. That grief goes outward and caring goes inward. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well,
So I can't assume what you're going through. I don't know.
yeah. And I kind of did that. I think I shared this with you privately, going back, something I learned last year, talking with Vanessa. When my dad died, my circle was me and my siblings,
Yep.
though we didn't engage. There was some
Yeah, because it brings out all those family dynamics.
right. But what I didn't understand was that Vanessa considered herself also in that circle. She shared with me later that
Yeah.
she considered my dad in many ways to be her dad. And so she mourned him in a similar way to me mourning. However, the way that we each grieve, I'm much more demonstrative. At least I was in that circumstance. And Vanessa tends to be more of an internal processor. So she's like wanted to give me my space to grieve. And even though ultimately we were basically, if not in the same circle, we were in concentric circles. That the way she processed was so much different than me in that regard. But the idea that, my mom's friends are mourning in a very different way than I am.
Or-
Yeah, and my siblings are mourning differently than me. My sister is really devastated. My brother didn't show up.
Well, your sister is because she took care of her, right? She lived with her.
No, no.
Okay, I'm sorry. I
No.
misunderstood.
There was a point where that what might have they were talking about that occurring, never did. Probably better that it didn't. But
Either way, it's just different.
yeah, there's just family dynamics that that like my sister and my little brother had been very close to my mom. They were the youngest, and when my parents separated, they lived with my mom. They hadn't got out of high school yet at that point, and so there was. They were just very much closer,
Yeah.
and I was already out of the house. Eric, my older brother, was out of the house, so there was kind of a departure there for us. So just different, like even as we could assume people might be in the same circles, they may not be, and if we assume people may not be in our circles, they may be, and it's really tricky. It's very complicated, and I think
Very complicated.
it all kind of boils down to be careful not to make assumptions that your experience is somebody else's experience, and to leave space to learn and take cues from the person who's grieving about what
Right.
they're experiencing, and not to impose our own experience upon them.
Because which is what I started with at the
Yeah.
beginning. You can't make it about you, and you really can't assume. Now, I did want to make a shift here. Was there's a couple of things that you mentioned it earlier that have not been helpful for you that people ask or say. One of them was, are they a Christian, or do they believe in Jesus? Why does that bother you? Why do you think that's not a helpful question?
Because it's the Valentine's Day question. Like on Valentine's Day, you're expected to give your spouse or significant other a gift, and if you don't, you're wrong, right? So when somebody asks a question like, do they believe in Jesus, or do they have a relationship with Christ, or whatever, if the answer isn't yes, then you are allowing space for discomfort, fear for that person. If my dad, I don't know what his relationship was with Christ. I hope that he had one. It's something that we occasionally engaged with him on, but because of all his friends that were hurt by the Catholic Church, he did not have a good relationship with the Catholic Church. And so when that question was asked about my dad, it just it hurt,
Yeah.
because the doubt that's there. What do I do? What do I do with that? And I think the intention of the question is that the answer is going to be yes, and that they get to say, well, it's at least she's in a better place or whatever, to lead to that assumption of a positive response. And but Vanessa, when I talked to her about it, she's like, it's just an invasive question, which is a strong way to say that. I think, again, the intention is good. It's just that you have to consider what the answer might be and what that might lead to.
That's what I think.
Yeah.
Is because what if the answer is no?
Yeah.
Then you've actually just brought up a pain point. You've actually caused more grief on the person you're trying to comfort. That's not a helpful thing. But then what's your reason for doing it? Are you trying to bring them comfort, or are you trying to bring you comfort?
Right.
I think it's more you. Or you just don't know. It's like there's no benefit to that question.
No.
I don't think there's a benefit. If the person who passed knew Jesus and the person you're asking knew that, they already have that comfort. There's no point of bringing it up at that point.
Right.
But if you do bring it up and they didn't, it's just it causes more pain. So that is not a helpful conversation question.
Yeah.
It's just not.
Yeah, it's one that I'm, I guess, particularly sensitive to, though, and just so folks know that my mom loved Jesus. Her relationship with Christ was important to her. I had some great conversations with her when she had doubts and thought that it wasn't allowable to have doubts. And I'm like, Mom, we all have doubts. I mean, unfortunately, our culture tells us that we're not supposed to say that. But the fact is that it's faith. And we all kind of struggle sometimes with, things that don't seem to line up or that challenge us. And we actually get stronger through that. And that's what I told her. I said, the bottom line is that if you believe that Christ died for our sins and then rose again and is the Son of God, then he's got you. The other stuff is I don't want to call it noise, but it's not. It all takes a back seat to that underlying truth, and that was really my message to her. I even shared that again with her as she was she was not conscious. Whether or not she heard it doesn't necessarily matter. But I needed to share that with her just in case she could. And I wanted her to have a confidence as she transitioned that her faith was not reliant upon some outlying things, so ultimately I have that confidence from my mom, which is why I felt joy when she passed, because I knew
Where she was going.
That her experience is going to be amazing.
But you don't want people to say things like, "Oh, she's in a better place," or "God needed an angel," or
yeah, I've got a bunch of those written down, but
right, it's like
cliches and platitudes.
I feel like that's minimizing her grief. What do you think?
I don't think that's the intention, but I think it's the result. No. It's the result. Yeah.
It's not the intention. The intention is to comfort.
Yeah. There's a song that I occasionally play for folks at church. It's not a worship song, but it's called "Come Close Now." And the song was written, it was inspired by the story of a couple who were trying to have a baby, and they finally got pregnant, and then like 5 months in, they lost the baby, and they were both devastated. And the husband described grief as being trapped in a house that's burning down, and you're strapped into a chair, and people keep coming in and doing everything they can to put out the fire, to untie you from the chair, to get you coax you out of the building and all that stuff, and nothing works. The best thing that you can do is sit next to that person and just burn with them as the house comes down, to be present with people. And that's what the song is about. Like if you are struggling, like I think the first line is I'm afraid of your grief, to paraphrase. I'm afraid of the place where you are, the place where you suffer. I'm afraid of the place where you suffer. And I think that's how a lot of us feel when somebody's grieving, because it's like we want to offer them some kind of comfort. It's just, it's the best of intentions. It's just that we say things that we've heard. That's actually another line. We say what we've heard. We think of all the platitudes that we've heard, the things we've seen on TV. But there's no quick fix, right? There's nothing that you're possibly going to say that's going to minimize, that's going to reduce it or anything like that. And so the intention is just be present, you know. And part of the reason I play that song is because I want us to just be a little more intentional, to be okay for to leave space for no words, but to just be with that person, to let them know you care. You know, Vanessa said 2 great things you can say are, I'm sorry. And 2 is, this is probably really hard. I'm sorry. You know, those are great things to say. And then if the person is in a position where they're ready to share or want to share, they'll give you cues and it'll be obvious, you know. And again, even though the answer was an affirmative in this case with my mom, it's more about what other people, you know, that wouldn't be something I would ask somebody else. And I just want us to build a library of things that we can say, or more appropriately do, that don't unintentionally make things harder for the person who's grieving.
Like, for instance, if you do get to a place where they are wanting to talk about them, instead of asking the question, are they a Christian? Just the basic question, tell me about them. It'll come up. But you don't want to ask that question,
right?
Whether or not they're Christian. You just know it's not helpful. You know, and just talking about them is helpful when they're ready.
Yeah, and
the right person, and the right location, and the right timing. Because sometimes don't be offended if you're not the person they want to confide in. Don't be offended if this isn't the right location. A public place may not be where it is, or maybe it's just not the time. Maybe they need more time. That's all okay. That's all okay.
Yeah, and I appreciate the qualifier of when they're ready. I've encouraged people in the past that the best thing you can do when somebody has lost somebody is to ask them questions about them, because a lot of times they want to share about that person. The qualifier, though, was something that was important with an experience I had a couple months ago with a friend whose father died. And I didn't know anything about his relationship with his father. I just knew that his dad had died. And knowing what my relationship with my dad, I made an assumption that his might be similar. And so I engaged in a way to ask or to encourage him to share. And basically he said he didn't have a good relationship with his dad, and it wasn't something he really wanted to talk about. And he did it in a way that was full of grace. He wasn't angry or anything. It was just basically, nope, it wasn't a good relationship. You know, I didn't want him to die, but it wasn't a foundational, meaningful relationship like I had with my dad. So, and that's where, be aware of cues, even if there are good things or there are ways to engage with people. Like if I start to talk about my mom, that probably means I want to talk about my mom. There's something I might want to share. So listen, you know.
And this is so hard because sometimes people are waiting to be asked, and some people are begging not to be asked.
That's right. Yeah, no, that's 100% true. And that's actually, I did some research today because I'm just like, I did not want to make the assumption that my experience or my limited experiences are universal. But there are some people that were angry that nobody engaged with them. And there were other people that were angry that people engaged with them. And I can say that for me, the most important is to engage with people in my own circle. Like, I want to talk with people whose experience is as close to mine as they can be, because that's validating. Do you feel the same way I do? Oh, good. And that's probably the toughest part about losing my dad, is I didn't really have anybody for that. You may not be in my circle for that kind of sharing.
Right. You just might not, and that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. And I will thank you if you offer condolences. When you see me on Sunday, first of all, it'll be Christmas Eve. So there's a lot of other stuff going on. Or rehearsal on Saturday morning for when we get together for the rehearsal for the program. I'm going to be in my own space, and I hope you guys respect that and understand that it's not because I don't like you or I don't. I please, to the extent you can, not take offense. Please don't take offense. It'll just be me needing some space, and
Yep.
yeah.
Well, I care about you, Joe,
Thank you. I care about you too.
and as much as I can support you, I will.
Thank you.
So, thanks for sharing your heart, and I'll be thinking about you and your family and praying for all of you.
Excellent. Thank you. I do again want to restate, I want to encourage people, if you have questions, if you want us to discuss elements of this, I mean, we do have some other things that we want to talk about. Maybe we talked about a lot today, but I'd like,
There's more.
there's definitely more to explore on the topic, and we want to make sure that if there are things that you would like us to address, send them our direction, because it's a good topic. I mean, we're all going to experience grief from one extent or another. So send that. And the other thing is that I don't want this to, I know this is a bit of a bummer, but this is still the season that we celebrate, that I get to be happy about my mom's transition because of Christ, that we get to celebrate wrapped in flesh here to save us. And that's what, if it weren't for that, then I wouldn't have the means to celebrate her life in the way that I do.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people are grieving right now.
Yeah.
It's very, very common. As I talked to some people over the last couple of weeks, most adults, Christmas becomes a sad time, not a happy time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because too many memories,
Yeah.
griefs. So,
Even if you haven't lost anybody, there's nostalgia,
there's nostalgia. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's nostalgia, and things that you wish had been that aren't and can never be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One more bit
All
of good
right.
news. One more bit of good news.
What?
After tomorrow, the days get longer.
Music to my ears. Thank you, Joe.
Yeah. All right, sir.
Take care.
All right. See you on Sunday, folks. Please be there for Christmas Eve. Well, looking forward to seeing you.